Hello, this is Ted Everingham, and this is Great Lakes Log on WMTV 5. Those of you who watch this show regularly know that I have a passion for sailing. And I've talked a lot of times about sailing with children and families and making sailing a part of your life. And I'm glad that somebody has finally written a book about the subject. His name is Nick Hayes. You'll meet him in a moment. The book is called Saving Sailing. And before you run to the TV set and say, I'm not interested in sailing, let me tell you that this book is about much more than just sailing. It's about lifestyle choices, it's about healthy living, it's about families, it's about making choices that make your life better, your future better for you, your family, your friends, and so forth. But I didn't write the book, Nick Hayes did. This is Nick. Welcome.
Thanks.
We're here at the Detroit Yacht Club. You're here to do a program at the Detroit Yacht Club, and that's great. I've spent a lot of happy hours here teaching my children to sail.
It's a lovely place.
It is a great place. This book intrigues me. First of all, Saving Sailing suggests that sailing is somehow in trouble, that participation is down. That's my observation. Can you quantify that for me?
Sure, I can. I'll do it with a little bit of background first.
Okay.
I'm not quite a lifelong sailor. I didn't start as a kid, but I started as a young adult, and I've been doing it now for about 30 years. And that means that in '79 or so, when I began sailing, there were about 12 million people who were recreationally sailing. That is, they were taking the time on the weekends to be on the water with family and friends.
Racing, cruising.
Whatever the format might be.
But sailing.
But sailing. Small boats, big boats. They might have been boats they owned. It might have been boats that they just joined up and participated on. And what we know from all sorts of different sources is that sailing, like other outdoor complex activities, is way down since 1979 when I began. Now only 2.6 million Americans call themselves active sailors, actually make that same commitment of time to the event, which means we've lost 80% of our population in a very short period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I witnessed that in my lifetime, both like you, just seeing my friends not do it anymore, but also as a volunteer at a community sailing center in Milwaukee and a volunteer at my own clubs. I've taken an interest in trying to understand why that occurred, and I collected data over the years, confirmed the trend, and,
mm-hmm.
and that's how this ultimately germinated.
So, to start with, there has been a decline in participation,
Yep.
which I have observed and lots of people have observed. You've quantified it. Here on a Saturday, we used to have 300 boats racing
Yep.
on Lake St. Clair, and now it's maybe, I don't know, 75 or 80 on a good Saturday. And that's a trend from, say, 1970 to 2010.
Yep.
So what do we do about it? What's the problem? Why has participation gone down? I'll tell you what I hear all the time. I don't have time.
Yep, exactly. I'm glad you zeroed in on that one key barrier. I'd like to let me go at this from two angles. The first is to say that statistically, since just 1997, sailing has declined 35%. Hunting and fishing have also declined at about the same pace. Backpacking, while not at the same pace, is now down as well. And when you put all those things into a category, what you realize is they're all outdoor, and they all require some commitment of time, as you've described, at least to do them well. And usually they're done in some small group of friends and possibly family in that format. Now where's time gone since 1979? That's really what you need to start looking at.
Sure.
If you want to start to understand this problem. And I put it into three boxes. For the book, I had to first look at my own time, free time, and try to understand how it was being spent. And then I had to look at how Americans' free time is essentially being spent. You know, everybody feels like they're much busier than they were before.
Yeah, I sure do.
And it's true that we're busier. The problem is that it seems that we've forgotten that we have a lot of control over whether or not we have ample free time. The Bureau of Labor Statistics will tell you that every American has 38 free hours a week, if you can imagine. Now, no American feels that way. Free really needs to be defined as selectable time. You can't choose when you sleep or when you work or go to school, if that's proxy for work. You can't choose eating or preparing, the personal care that happens. But everything else comes from a choice that you make, like where you put your house and whether or not you'll have a long commute time between where you live and work that consumes a whole bunch of time and puts you behind the windshield during that period of time. Or whether or not you're going to become addicted to a television program, for example, that might happen every evening for an hour. Those are choices we make that ultimately consume time, and you can find that the three big time sinks that have come online since the 70s are the commute, the drive time, the time we spend in front of media, which is television and computers and smartphones and Facebook and all of those things. And then there is a new paradigm of how we raise our kids, and that's that we drive them around to all sorts of programs that they try and watch them do the things that they'll do, like
The soccer and the t-ball and the swim meets and the dance classes and that sort of thing?
Music lessons and
Sure.
all of those things we'll witness.
So the parent becomes a spectator.
Exactly. Sum it all up, and what you're left with is the 38 hours are gone. They've vaporized, but they vaporized because of the way we structured our lives.
But we've done that to ourselves. We've made those choices.
We did. And there are probably a bunch of reasons why. I mean, since the late 70s, we've been building houses further away. So it takes us longer to drive to our work, obviously. And if you want to own a house, you want an inexpensive one, you have to buy it further away. That's one of the dynamics. But if you think about what was happening in the 70s when there were 300 boats on the water, the commitment that was being made was a very rich and deep one. It meant that potentially every weekend for an entire summer, a group of 8 or 9 or 10 people of different ages and different backgrounds would all agree to meet down here at 7 o'clock in the morning and not come off the water until 7 p.m. that night and come back down on Sunday morning and do the same thing all over again for 28 days in the summer. That's an enormous commitment of time. And if you wanted to continue doing that, you couldn't make the choice to do the other things that we've talked about.
So people have made different choices than they used to be making.
Yep.
Is that because there are more choices? There's a longer menu of things to do?
That's a good question. I like to think about this in generational terms.
Please do. I know where this is going.
Yeah, let's go here for a little while. I'm 48, so I'm on the back end of the boomers. I have a couple of teenage kids. My dad was a Korea-era child, and his father before that and his older brother were war-era children, Depression and then World War II. And I think that if you think about this in terms of the motivation of three generations,
right.
My grandfather's generation, my dad's generation,
Okay.
and mine. My grandfather's experience was depression and war lined up and left him thinking, we've got an opportunity to do something really great for our kids. And so let's take this peace dividend post-World War II and go fishing on Saturdays. And so that's what they did. He'd pack up his sedan and he'd drive to Wisconsin and he'd find a lake and they'd rent a motorboat for $15 or whatever the price was at the time, maybe $3, and spend the weekend fishing. And those are my father's memories then of his childhood. And my dad is a fisherman. That's how he thinks of himself. He thinks of himself as a fisherman maybe more than he thinks of himself as a journalist, which is what he did for 35 years as a career.
Okay.
Now, somewhere between my dad and me, we did some fishing, and I have some experiences like that, but it was less urgent. I had a great school that I was going to be able to go to, and I was going to get an education and have a career, and so the time got moved into different categories at a younger age, and by the time it got to my kids, we'd forgotten that on Saturday afternoons, one of the things we did was head outside with our families. It doesn't exist anymore. It's not in our psyche to think about it that way. It's really changed in 3 generations.
So it's been an evolutionary process, starting with that Depression era, World War II, get out of the Depression and slide into World War II, and they're 10 years, 20 years taken there. And my father lived through that,
Yep.
and his goal in life was to make a better life for his children than he had, and that's what you're telling me.
That is exactly what I'm talking about. Now let's take that to modern times. Because what we have in sailing now is more kids in junior sailing programs than ever in our history in the United States. We have more kids who take lessons at maybe a place like this or a sailing center in some town inexpensively. They learn how to sail on small boats. They learn fantastic skills.
They start when they're maybe 7?
Start when they're 7 or 8 years old.
Yeah.
By the time they're 25, 95% of them will have quit and will never return.
They've quit, that's one thing, because they go to school and
Right.
they're starting families and careers, but they never return?
They never return.
Never.
Think about it this way. If when I go out and do talks, I'll have a room of 20 people or 50 people, and I'll ask them, how many of you took piano lessons as a child? And of course, 8 will raise their hands, and then you ask how many still play, and only 1 still does.
Yeah, well, okay.
It's the same thing. What junior sailing is today is the piano lesson of the sailing world. And the way the child thinks of it is, it's what I did and conquered as a kid. I can move on. Or I got to a place where I wasn't good enough anymore in my college career, so I got cut, now I'm going to move on. It's never thought of as the thing you did with Dad on Saturdays with this generation.
And that you're going to continue doing the rest of your life.
With my kids, because
Yeah.
it makes sense, because think about it, the way I was raised.
Sure, sure. It's fascinating to think about and a little frightening.
It is. I think a couple things happen in this dynamic. Let's talk about, again, why my father's generation loved fishing so much and still fish. When they're there, they're motivated by nostalgia, the memories of Dad. In sailing, if you talk with boomer sailors who make up 80% of our population,
Sure.
what you'll get is answers like, well, we did it starting with my grandmother. We never did anything else. Or you'll get answers like, I had a camp counselor who showed me how to sail this scow. And you don't have scows here, but we have scows where I'm from. And that camp counselor was really an important person in my life. That's who I think about. Or you'll hear, my family's from Ireland, I need to be near the water. Or my grandfather fought in the war and he was in the Navy and I need to be connected to the water. You see what I mean?
Sure,
it's all
yeah,
nostalgically driven with that group. And when you look at how the nostalgia was developed, it was because it was an intergenerational format. There were people of 2 age groups at least in the boat together cooperating, sharing fine and fond experiences. And when you take that and you move it over to the piano lesson thing, this new metaphor of junior sailing, what you get is a bunch of kids in boats by themselves, sailing against kids that are the same age.
And perhaps gender.
And perhaps gender, exactly right. There is the potential for some coaching, but coaching does what it does. It focuses on the best, and everybody else kind of gets lost. So you end up you don't end up with the memory that creates a nostalgic view of it that makes you want to continue into the next 10 or 15 or 20 years of your life.
And that's at least in part, is this your premise, that's at least in part because it's not an intergenerational activity for the 7-year-old, the 8-year-old, the 12-year-old who's sailing